So, a little while ago, I went to Value Village and found this PC for just 25 Canadian dollars on the shelf. Initially, I was kind of skeptical because the computer's side panel was hanging loose, and the computer's graphics card had appeared to have been removed at some point. So I brought the computer over the bench and plugged it in to see if it could at least turn on, and surprisingly, it did. So I coughed up the $25 and brought this PC back home, as the spec sheet seemed pretty promising. This is the Acer Predator G3 from 2014, and today I want to see if it's worth using a gaming PC that costs just 25 Canadian dollars. Can I use it to actually play games? We're about to find out. To continue my story, after I brought the PC home, I discovered it didn't have RAM installed. Yes, it took me that long to realize. So I had to wait 2 weeks for some RAM to come from AliExpress. I bought 16 gigs of RAM for $6, and surprisingly, it worked pretty well and I was able to power on the PC.
No way. It actually freaking works.
The first thing I discovered was that whoever had the PC before me had replaced the CPU from the i7 that originally shipped with a dual-core Haswell-era Pentium, which was extremely disappointing to see. This, combined with the lack of the promised GTX 760, gave me low expectations for this computer. Still, I cleaned out the old thermal paste, slapped an SSD inside the computer, and proceeded to install Windows 11. Now, before you guys get mad at me for installing Windows 11 and not a Linux distro, in my defense I wanted to try GTA Online, which is only playable on Windows, and Windows 10 is losing support soon, so it's pretty much irrelevant. Plus, I wanted to see how bad Windows 11 has gotten since I've only used LTSC versions of Windows 11 and not the standard version. After going quickly through Windows 11 setup and bypassing the Microsoft account requirement, I got to the desktop and began setting up the computer, while also removing all the bloat and other junk that Windows 11 usually includes. This is when I found out about the biggest hurdle in this computer, and to no one's surprise, it's the dual-core Pentium. Installing things or doing more than one thing at once slows down the computer pretty badly. Either way, I finished the setup on the computer and installed everything I wanted to benchmark and test. The first thing I tried was benchmarking the hardware inside the machine to see how it compared to some other computers I own, and the results were abysmal, as expected. I started off with Geekbench 6 as that's a pretty standard piece of benchmarking software, and the CPU inside this 14 beast scored a measly 590 points for single core and 1012 points for multi-core performance. For context, this PC is currently about as fast as my iPad 6th generation, which was released in 2018. This probably explains why the PC struggles to do anything beyond even the most basic of tasks. I then tried two different GPU benchmarking tools to test the integrated graphics in this PC. The first was 3D Mark's Firestrike benchmark, which scored a whopping 415 points, making the GPU approximately 192 times slower than the RTX 5090. Lastly, I tried Unigine Heaven at 1080p with the Extreme preset, and to no one's surprise, it scored 53 points and ran at 2.3 frames a second. This PC got absolutely wrecked by the benchmarks, mostly due to the Pentium as well as the combination of the integrated graphics. Okay, so maybe the computer doesn't exactly do the best in benchmarks, but maybe it can make up for it in actual gaming performance, although that's highly unlikely. I didn't have a capture card at this time when I recorded these benchmarks, so you'll have to forgive my method of recording the footage, as obviously the computer was not powerful enough to record its own screen while playing games. The first game I tested was the latest version of Minecraft at the time of recording, 1.21.1 at 720p with lowered settings. I didn't install Optifine for this test, so this is the unmodified Minecraft experience on this computer. The performance in single player was pretty horrible as the frame rate was all over the place the entire time, but if I had to average it, I would say it averaged around 50 frames per second at best. Multiplayer was a lot better as the CPU didn't have the burden of loading in the world, and I saw around 70 to 75 frames per second there, with a lot less dips and stutters. The next game I tested was Rocket League at 720p with the absolute lowest settings the game would allow. The game was mostly hovering around 30 frames per second, however there were a lot of awful dips that would happen, tanking the frame rate to the teens for brief periods of time before stabilizing again. This made the game quite painful to try to actually play. I think I'd rather play Rocket League on the Switch instead of this PC. Next, I tried 2021's hottest indie game, Among Us, because it was already in my Epic Games library, and I figured it would work pretty well due to it most being a 2D game. And this proved true, as throughout my time playing Among Us, it managed to stay locked at 60 frames per second the entire time with no real lags or stutters, and overall it was super smooth to play. I tried a couple of older games as well, with the first one being Half-Life 2, a PC gamer classic from what I've heard. I've never actually played through Half-Life before despite having it in my Steam library. This title, I couldn't figure out how to disable VSync, but the computer still averaged a solid 60 frames per second at 1080p with the default games that the game set up for me. Up next is a slightly newer game, Portal 2, which ran at 1080p medium settings, averaging 55 to 60 FPS with no real stutters or dips in gameplay. Now I'm moving on to some of the more heavier, and in some cases, unoptimized games. This is really where the PC starts showing its lack of power in its current configuration. I began with one of my favorite games of all time, Grand Theft Auto 4. This game is horribly optimized for PC and runs like crap on all but the most powerful hardware I own, so I had very low hopes for this computer. And just as I predicted, at 720p with the absolute lowest settings I could deploy, this game still only managed to creak out a meager 20 frames per second average at best, before factoring the stutters from loading the new chunks of game. The same goes for the next Grand Theft Auto game in the franchise, GTA 5, as in single player, with the same settings, it pretty much averaged the same exact performance, with online completely unable to load. This game in particular has a massive issue with loading textures off of the hard drive, which makes me suspect that there's something wrong with the connection of the hard drive that I put in this PC. Up next on the intensive but not really games list, we have Fortnite. I've never actually played Fortnite before, so I was going into this game basically for the first time, but even at 720p, lowest settings with the 3D resolution downscaled to 50%, so in reality the game was running at 360p, the PC was hovering around the 25 frames per second mark. I did almost manage to sweat a kill on this guy as I was playing against him, but in the end he got me. Finally, to wrap things up in the gaming benchmarks, we have Counter-Strike 2. I was hoping to at least load into a match with the lowest settings I could possibly manage to set with this game, but I couldn't even join a single match without disconnecting me during the loading process, similar to GTA Online. And that about wraps up the gaming section of this video. So in the end, this computer is pretty useless as a gaming computer for $25. A lot of the hardware that was originally on this computer's sticker has been stripped out, and the components that were put in place of them aren't exactly the greatest either. Even the motherboard has been swapped out for a generic Asus motherboard. Now, does this mean that this computer is useless? Not entirely. Aside from the RAM and the SSD, the computer was almost ready to use after picking it up from Value Village, which is something you can't say about a lot of things coming from that place. The computer does work decently well for basic tasks such as checking email, web browsing, watching YouTube videos, etc. Plus, this computer has some serious upgrade potential as it stands right now. The CPU is socketed, and I could find a relatively powerful GPU to put in this machine, both of which would massively improve the performance. I'm thinking of maybe making a series where I upgrade this computer over the course of a few YouTube videos. So if you're interested in seeing that, leave a comment on this video. I hope you enjoyed watching this video. I do apologize for the lack of activity on my channel. I've had a busy school year, but I hope to be getting back on track soon now that the summer's coming up. Fingers crossed with that one, because, you know, that never pans out. If you didn't like this video, don't like, don't comment, and please unsubscribe. I'll see you all next time.